All right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome in everyone to today's webinar, How to Implement District-Wide CTE Programs Aligned to State Standards. We're really pleased to have you here and get into this. Let's introduce today's panel. Our moderator today is Cassie Rochholz, the Senior Director of State Strategy at Edmentum. Cassie works in close partnership with state educational agencies and policymakers to identify critical needs, design data-driven solutions, and implement initiatives that enhance educational equity and outcomes. Cassie has a ton of experience in research, policy analysis, cross-functional collaboration, and prior to joining Edmentum, she had a similar role with ACT. We also have David DeSchryver. David is the Senior VP and Co-Director of Research for Whiteboard Advisors. He focuses on complex market research and analysis on emerging markets in the education and corporate training sectors. David has been a part of a wide range of cutting-edge education issues over his 20-year career, including helping state policymakers craft the charter school laws back in the 90s. We have Heidi Flynn. Heidi is a National Solutions Director with Edmentum based in Texas. Heidi brings over 18 years of experience in Texas education to her role with Edmentum. Her work has involved driving initiatives in literacy, intervention, pathways, school improvement. She also has a lot of experience in the CTE space. She was with the Texas Education Agency as Assistant Director for post-secondary programming, and she designed and implemented the Pathways in Technology Early College High School model, PTEC. You're going to hear more about that today. And our final panelist, Dr. Joe Baker. He is a customer success manager based in Maryland and DC with Edmentum. He has more than 20 years of experience driving change in PK-12 settings. He's been an educator, school principal, education director, and he's a certified superintendent. So he brings a whole blend of insights to his work here and to today's panel. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand things over to Cassie to get us started.
Well, thank you, Ross. It's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to be a moderator to these fine folks that I have with me today. As I know everyone has heard, there's a lot going on in the market, particularly around career-connected learning and how we can make sure that our K-12 systems are set up for success to address that. We know that governors, particularly 33 this year, have already stressed the importance of CTE and making sure that there's educational pathways and programs for their students to have success. Many of the states that we support here at Edmentum are doing such things as well. But without further ado, I do want to go into some questioning today and want to talk a little bit of which each of one of you around what might be happening in your states that you have been working in, and focus on Heidi. If it's okay, I'd like to start with you a little bit. Ross kind of introduced you a little bit about being all things related to Texas and having such a strong focus in Texas. Tell me a little bit more, Heidi, about what are you seeing in terms of just what's going on in Texas? What's their focusing? What are they really thinking about in terms of classroom and preparing those students for those career programs that are coming in Texas, particularly?
Well, thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone. So there's kind of three things I want to talk to you all about. And basically, I'm going to say something that's probably not going to surprise anyone on this call, but there's a new refreshed emphasis on getting students to completion status with CTE, right? So we want them completing an entire program of study over their 4 years in school. And so it's not a new emphasis, it's kind of a refreshed emphasis. So we'll talk about that. Second, it's a focus on local or regional workforce needs when schools and districts are planning out what pathways they're going to offer for students. And third, kind of a statewide level initiative called the 60 by 30 plan, which is a collaboration between the Texas Workforce Commission, the Texas Education Agency, and the Higher Education Coordinating Board. So you've got colleges, you've got workforce, and you've got public ed K-12 kind of all coming together to create an umbrella goal. So let's talk first around that refreshed and deepening emphasis on completers. So, my son graduated high school probably about 6 years ago, and he was kind of a bopper around CTE, right? He took a bunch of different courses, got some certifications, and that was okay at that time. We really want to kind of get students focused in at ninth grade and completing a pathway. So how do we do that? Well, one of the ways that we're looking at in Texas is really moving the exploration piece to middle school. How do we in the middle grades get students prepared by ninth grade to feel confident that they're choosing a program of study that they're going to complete? Second, around regional workforce is TEA has put out some really great programs of study for schools to engage in, and a lot of documentation and a lot of systems around that. They also allow schools to respond to regional needs. So if there is not a program of study that meets their regional needs, they're able to sculpt that and have students move through that as well. So as you can imagine, a state as big as Texas, and I'm sure there are other big states on this call as well, you may have a section of the state like in Texas, West Texas, focusing on wind, oil and gas, energy, Central Texas, technology, and then over the whole state, healthcare. And so thirdly, our governor has basically asked our three top agencies in Texas to come together and come up with an umbrella goal. The goal is called the 60 by 30 plan, and you can certainly research that and look at that, but it's a whole plan between these three agencies to ensure that 60% of Texans have a work credential or a degree or a certificate by 2030. So we're currently looking at that plan right now and kind of refreshing it in light of everything that's happened over the past few years. But those are some of the things that we're working on here in Texas, Cassie.
That's great, Heidi. I can definitely relate to a lot what's going on in your state. Particularly, I come from the state of Iowa, and we're doing similar things here as well. But let's go over to the East Coast. Dr. Baker, can you tell me a little bit more what's happening in Maryland? I know that they've been a front runner across the nation, particularly in their blueprints, but I would like to hear more from you about what's going on in Maryland, as well as some of the other states that you worked in.
Sure. And yeah, pleasure to be here, everybody. Yes, I work in Maryland. I live in Pennsylvania. I've served Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, DC. So I've had a little niche in the Northeast here. And really, you touched on it. Maryland has really been at the forefront of all of that with their blueprint. And very refreshing to hear what Heidi was saying, because I kind of thought we were the only ones in that kind of work sometimes. But it's nice to hear that Texas is involved in that too. But I think where Maryland really takes it is it's really not just defining career pathways, but they've even gotten so far in as defining what the courses are that actually serve those career pathways, down to what does ninth grade look like, 10th grade, 11th grade. And another thing that similar to what Heidi was talking about in Texas is that there is this, I'll use your word, refreshed look at completer status. Um, where in Maryland, the goal is about 45% of students that reach that completer status. But a little bit different than in any place that I've served is that completer status has to include an industry recognized credential or an apprenticeship. So really allowing for students to get on the job training that is directly in line with that career. And that is a mandatory piece of all of this. And I think where Maryland really, I don't want to say it's necessarily unique, but unique for my experience is it's really starting to mandate systemic change, as opposed to some of the local control that we see, like especially in Pennsylvania, everything is local control. This is completely systemic. And in Maryland, we use a county-based system. So all of those schools within a county, it really forces all of these entities to really start to be on the same page and really start to collaborate whenever it comes to really implementing these requirements.
Yeah, for sure. I think the apprenticeship, as well as some of those industry related credentials, are certainly something that I know policymakers, some legislators are certainly happening. David, I'd like to turn it over to you for a second. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you're seeing? I know Whiteboard does a tremendous amount of research in this space, particularly to understand across all of the states, what are some common emphasis, some themes that are bubbling up from either this legislative session, last year's session, and budget bills and provisos that are happening across the nation. Can you tell us a little bit more what you're seeing?
Yeah, it's as everyone's mentioned, and hello everyone. Glad to be here. There is that new incentive to kind of how do we get more students across the finish line? How do we get them to earn like in-demand credentials? How do we get them engaged? And like what does that mean for the families and communities? Now, like my job is to figure out, all right, so what are the incentives? Where's the money? And like that's like one of the big questions. And so what we do see is, and this has been like chipping away at the accountability provisions, the financial incentives, the weights that are provided, incentives for weights, for industry certifications that meet high demand criteria. And so tend to look at what is happening both in the governance, in the accountability, and in the funding. And we've seen, I think, steady progress. What's important to me is recognizing that, and everyone here realizes that, but like the level of state investment and state leadership really matters. Um, the the balance between the federal contribution and the state contribution across the states really varies. Um, and the methodology of getting getting the money to the schools to incentivize engagement varies as well. So mapping that out, and what we see that through the last legislative session, you have more incentives being put in place and more career pathways. So like Alabama, the Alabama Workforce Pathway Act was passed. That allows like a full diploma equivalent to a regular diploma that elevates career funding. You see incentives like in North Carolina where there's more money being added for in-demand industry certifications. And so it's the bits and pieces of accountability, um, funding, and alignment to the broader goal that's the interesting narrative to me. And so we try to track all this, and I think at the end of the day, like at the most boring level, like trying to look at, all right, if you're a school official, I want to know on your spreadsheet, what are those four revenue codes that you're really paying attention to? Because we can talk in the abstract, we can talk big, but ultimately, what's an allowable course, what's an allowable program, and from what revenue line? Like if you can piece that together, that's meaningful. And we are seeing progress. Like everything is moving in the right direction. We are seeing progress. We are seeing more pathways, more incentivizing for completion, more awards and weights being added. And like, so overall, my message is like, don't overlook the boring stuff because that's where it happens.
That's excellent advice. I know, hot off the presses, actually, today, my son, who is a senior, went through an academy program with our local partnership that we have in our local community school district with our local community college. And today he's taking his first ever industry related credential. And hopefully by the end of the day, he will be an ASC certified mechanic. So hopefully that will be good for him. But I can see that happening throughout what we're seeing, making sure that everything is relevant to what's happening. We talked about, Joe, you talked particularly about what's happening in Maryland and making sure that those students get in that pathway and the policies and the funding necessary to do that to make it economically feasible for school districts to do that. There are programs that are available a lot. And I really just want to shout out to Edmentum, particularly last week, we actually launched a partnership with Interplay that allows really an economically feasible way to really get hands-on skill trap training for their K-12 systems that allows for programs, particularly 9 different skills from plumbing to electrical to clean energy, really being able to understand and explore. Heidi, you picked up on that in Texas, particularly being able to explore some of these career pathways, understand what interests lie, and being able to chart those particular pathways and courses that align to the interests and needs of students. And I'm really excited to have this as an offering from Edmentum to be able to explore and provide this virtual hands-on experimental simulation experience provided to all the school districts for particularly affordable, scalable price. So given that, I want to
Yeah.
turn
And
a
I'll
little,
say one more
yeah,
thing
go
on that.
ahead.
That's like what you're probably benefiting is more states are putting funds towards
Yes.
dual credit programs. So kind of offset the costs. And underneath that comes some financial availability for the courses that are taken in the dual enrollment programs. So both, in some cases, they're paying for the transportation. In some cases, they're paying for the enrollment fees in the post-secondary institution, offset some of that, and then the courses that underlie that. So you see that in Idaho, that's part of the Advanced
Hmm.
Opportunity Scholarship Program. You
Exactly.
see that in other states. So there are kind of a tapestry of efforts that are moving things in this direction. And I think understanding like what's the line item, what's the benefit, and how does this move it forward for students and create incentives for schools to get more engaged in this.
That's right. And what better ways to get that hands-on learning? I know parents would definitely sign up for that to let their kids to have that experience, get a little bit resume building on what they're getting that dual enrollment programs, particularly. Let's kind of turn our wheels a little bit to that angle. If it's okay, Joe, I'd like to have you start first. I want to talk a little bit about where do you see particularly Edmentum career? How are you working and supporting partnerships with this career connected learning, particularly? What are you seeing as a focus that is actually coming to fruition and some successful programs that have been implemented, some of the outcomes that you're seeing, particularly in the states that you support? And then Heidi will go ahead and give you that same question next as well.
Sure. And I think, Cassie, you said two words that are pretty much a nice symbiotic relationship here. It's Edmentum and partnership. I think a lot of times, and this is where the best part of my work comes in whenever I'm working with our partner districts, and even whenever I'm talking to some of my former colleagues that were educators and educational leaders. Everybody thinks of Edmentum as a software provider, right? And I think at its fundamental, that's one of the things that we offer. And in that there's a great benefit to that piece of the Edmentum puzzle. We talk about being able to provide that high quality CTE instruction and that coursework through courseware. Um, and whenever we think about it, where is that really beneficial? And I think about CTE instruction, we don't necessarily graduate teachers from our teacher prep programs that are CTE driven. Like we don't graduate welding teachers, we don't graduate healthcare teachers. We graduate teachers. So oftentimes we're bringing in professionals from the industry that are perfect experts at the field, but the pedagogy may not necessarily be there. So the one nice thing that we can provide is that foundational curriculum assessment and instruction package that can help some of those people coming in from those fields to sort of get their feet wet with how do I teach this, especially to high school level students, right? So I think that's one piece of the puzzle, but where Edmentum really takes another turn and I think really puts ourselves different from a lot of our competitors is the fact that that partnership does exist. So we talk about um, what happens behind the scenes, and I know that I've been a part of this over the last year or two working in Maryland. We have our back end people. We have our, well, Cassie, our state strategy teams that are out there taking a look at everything that's coming down the pike that way. We have our product teams that are looking at how we can revise content, create new content, and then we have our marketing teams to let everybody know what it is that we're doing. But those are all internal partnerships that then also get shared with us, who are the customer facing people, our CSMs and our partnership managers. And because we have such a strong alignment internally, we can bring a lot of that stuff from the field and from the legislation and really make it applicable to those districts that are really going to need those programs. And I think what add another layer to the onion, if you will, is the fact that there's been such an emphasis over the last year and a half at really focusing on that middle level instruction, because as we're tightening up that high school CTE program and making sure that students get 1, 2, 3 courses in before they graduate, they better be focused whenever they enter high school. So whenever we can provide that middle school instruction and really focus that, give them a little bit of that exploration, and now also with our embedded interest inventory that is in there, I think that is really going to be a nice way to start at, say, that 6th and 7th grade level. Find out where your students' interests lie, find out where their strengths lie, so that in, say, an 8th grade year, you are starting to focus and narrow down the path. Maybe it's one pathway, maybe it's 2 or 3. It doesn't really matter, but better than everything. And then trying to come into 9th grade and try to figure it out there. So I think we really partner with everybody to make sure that whenever we do implement this in school districts, we are really trying to focus how is this going to be most effective, not only for you as an administrator, but for your students to set them up for success 4, 5, or 6 years down the road.
Absolutely, Joe. I think that really makes it relevant to what's the learning is happening. You have students that actually are hungry for that information. They're really trying to chart their own path. They don't know where they want to go. They don't know what they want to explore, but being able to successfully dabble in a couple different areas and explore which pathway may find the success. There's a lot of research out there that talks about your interests and your academic ability correlate so nicely into what major you would want to have in post-secondary institutions. So this is not just a career focus. This is also a college or post-secondary institution. I'm going to go into higher ed institutions focus as well as I make my transitions there. Heidi, tell me a little bit more what you're seeing and what you've experienced boots on the grounds and some of the partnerships that you have helped along the way and some of the successes that you've learned.
Yes, absolutely. And I think Dr. Baker was a fly on the wall in our meeting yesterday that we had with 8 districts, talking about some of the things that you absolutely just brought up. How do we start in middle school? What do we do in middle school? And of course, we did talk about Edmentum career and that inventory, and then also talking about the challenges around staffing shortages at high school, just like you mentioned. And one of the things that the districts in the room really liked was the flexibility of courseware, the ability to use the skilled trade preps with interplay to help bolster teachers, not only teachers from industry, but CTE trained teachers who may not have the hands-on. So now we can cover both, right? We can cover both types of CTE teachers. And then also when talking about keeping students on the pathway at high school. So everyone on the call, I'm sure, can think of a million reasons why students veer off their pathway, right? Their CTE pathway, their graduation pathway. And so we had a really in-depth conversation around CTE and credit recovery. Because in the past, we always talked about credit recovery in the realm of the 4 core, right? We need to get your math recovered, Algebra 1. But now we're looking at, well, we have a student who, for whatever reason, missed the seat time, didn't have the skills, but they failed a CTE course. How do we keep them on their pathway so that they're able to complete? And so districts are looking at using courseware and all of our rich CTE courses that we have in there to set up programs over the summer and at 0 hour for students to recover credit and stay on their pathway. But then what happens if a student wants to change? So say they want to be a doctor and they get to 9th grade and they do their principles of healthcare and they start really researching and they're like, you know what, I don't want to do this. I want to work with my hands. I want to be an HVAC. Do we have a system in our schools for students to change a pathway when they want to? And so some of the districts were saying, well, we can create those systems, right? We can have summer school for CTE acceleration. CTE changers, pathway changers, they were calling them. And so Edmentum can really provide that. And then we actually had a demo of Interplay, and it was the coolest thing. And it caused so much buzz. We all got to go in and look at a simulation of how to create an air conditioner with HVAC. And in Texas, it's hot. And when our air conditioners break, it can take 2 to 3 days to get someone out there. And so I'm like, more HVAC certified certified folk get paid a lot of money in Texas. And so I was like, maybe I can get certified in HVAC. So anyway, it was really, really interesting. So one of the things that I've been working with Cassie is really partnering, as Dr. Baker said, with districts to help them understand how do we structure credit recovery for CTE? How do we structure classrooms where we need to stack CTE courses, such as architecture 1, 2, and 3, when we have one teacher for half a day? And then how do we help students change pathways when they need to? And then layering on that hands-on piece with interplay. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
That is wonderful. Yeah, definitely going to be calling upon you to if I need my air conditioning fixed, since you are now an expert in that.
I'm going to learn it. I'm going to learn it.
All right. Well, I know having worked at the local school board level as well, I'm on our local school board. I know that funding is always a hot topic that we're talking about. There's never enough funding. There's never enough resourcing to be able to bring some of these programs into the district and adequately fund them in a way that's really going to drive the kinds of outcomes that we're looking to see. So David, could you have any advice or what do you think? I know you mentioned it before about what's happening on the legislative side, what's happening a little bit with driving the money, particularly on those funding sources that are really relevant. What are some advice that you have for districts on how they can tap into different funding sources to be able to fuel these programs within their school districts? You're muted. Oh, there you are.
I was avoiding coughing into the screen. I think that some of the key is kind of recognizing what is the priority for the state. So in many cases, there is an eligibility that a student is taking an approved program of study, an approved course. And by that, it's typically one that's taught by a certified CTE teacher, or that's also linked and meets the standards or the alignment to the program of study. And the pathway that the state has approved. So ensuring that I would say quality program is in place is critical. And when you do that, that allows, I'm going to say a word that I hate saying generally, to unlock not only just the Perkins funds, but also the state and local revenue. So in Heidi, I know in Texas, you have conversations with TEA, and yes, it has to be an approved program of study and it has to align in order to access the Perkins dollars. But there's also, state CTE funding. So there is no prohibition on trying new things, trying new programs, and utilizing the state career and technical education accounts or the general revenue accounts to do so. And so there are a lot of opportunities that are also being supported by new grants that state lawmakers are passing. And these new grants, as I mentioned before, are dealing with apprenticeship programs, dual enrollment programs, instructional material programs that are rooted in high quality. And those together create, I think, a wide variety of opportunities. It's not just a Perkins approved program, but rather it's the blending and braiding of multiple sources that help integrate it into the core instructional program of that school district.
Yeah, absolutely. And what makes it so relevant is when you bring all these pieces together, and particularly, so you start with the middle school, you're exploring, you're understanding, you're bringing it into your course of study as it gets to graduation requirements in the high school, being able to fuel some of those and understanding that multidimensional layer that you have between I'm bringing in my core academics and I'm also layering on that additional CTE, career connected learning opportunities for students so I can blend those worlds together. We see some portrait of a graduate and those employability skills really popping up in the different strategies that are coming forward, whether it be at the state level or the local district level. Those are the things that are commonly being looked to from employers for different scholarships, for different leadership opportunities that students may have after they transition from high school into post-secondary, wherever they may go, wherever their path may take them. And bringing that all together and having that continuous system of support and that multidimensional layer, it definitely seems to be where it's at. And those funding sources that are there are in so many different areas to blend it all together, really making it cohesive for those students and addressing that whole child, that whole learning environment.
And
So
uh,
those,
and one
yeah,
more point on that, I think there's like one of the challenges, like conceptually, when you're figuring out like how do you pay for this and what are the
yeah,
programs, is that historically, like CTE funding wasn't for everybody. Like it only served a
right.
certain share of students. You're now moving into a conversation where CTE like for all, and what does that mean? And that is fundamentally rethinking CTE as a component of a core mathematical instructional program. It could be part of ELA as well. It's not an isolated program, but rather beginning to be more integrated into kind of the broader definition of student success. So that's, you'll see articles, you'll see conversations of what do we mean by CTE for all? And what that is a signal that this is unlike what it used to be. And it's changing the way we think about some of the core materials, the core practices, and student and parent engagement. So there's a lot to unpackage there. But when you realize the shift that's happening, not just on the funding side, but the objective side and what we mean by student success, you realize that opens up a variety of different funding combinations.
And it's important. This is driving those accountability models that you spoke of earlier today. Is understanding what the schools need to have as part of their systems to really be able to support that as well. Speaking of some school systems in particular, I know that there's a lot of, funding. Yes, it's been a challenge, but it's good news in the market that there is some availability and there's a lot of variety of funding sources. But there are other challenges that also face districts as they build out their career connected learning programs. And I know a lot of different programs and having too many programs, not enough programs, and being able to cater to a lot of different needs. But Joe, can I pick on you particularly? I want to talk a little bit about what are you seeing in terms of what are some additional challenges that districts are facing when they're trying to stand up some of these programs, and what are you doing in particular to like help them and navigate these waters that may be foreign or new to them?
Sure, and this is really not new, whether you're talking about education or whether you're talking about industry. I think the first and foremost is the siloing that occurs amongst different programs. A lot of times people still view CTE as its own standalone program. I know here in Pennsylvania, we run CT a much different way. And we have our CTCs, our career and technical centers that do all of this instruction away from the high schools. So there's not really a CTE component in the actual schools. But Maryland's exactly the opposite. CTE is embedded in every school that is there. So now it can't just be the CTE director because it's a lot more because everything is intertwined now. It's part of graduation requirements. So that brings in our educator or
Mhm.
our administrators. So because they're responsible for graduation rates and things like that. So we really work with a lot of our districts to really bridge the gap between all of those people because yes, CTE has a place in it, but our building leadership has places in that, our teachers have a role in all of that. And we also talk about having to bring in curriculum directors too, because we have to take a look at standards alignment. We have to take a look at course sequencing, credit structures. We have to bring in our school counselors because we have to talk about credit structures and graduation and things like that. But I think a lot of times the hardest person to bring to the table is that central office administrator, but
Mhm.
really trying to emphasize the reason why it's important because now with a lot of these changes and the changes in requirements, it's not just curriculum, it can be policy review. And so we really need to be in tune with all of that, not just in the fact that a district may need to realign in order to meet a requirement, but we may need to switch away from things that we've always done, right? Um, and I think Heidi was talking a little bit earlier too about the whole notion of like credit recovery. Uh, you know, CTE and CTE courses and things like that, that's the foundation of why we're here, right? But the probably another important piece is that whole credit recovery because if our students do get off track, we need to be able to get them back on track. And really trying to look at those students. This was actually a new one to me as we were going around to a lot of our customers last summer, was whenever they're doing those apprenticeships and those internships, they can't be in the school. So they need a way to get their core instructions because, as I said, we're a county-based program. In that county-based program, they may have an internship that's 45 minutes away, an hour away. They're not going to make it back to their home school. So being able to also provide that opportunity for a student to make up all of their core coursework is just as important as the CTE. And then the last piece too is that whole notion of equity. And Cassie, you're big into the whole equity piece. In Maryland, we serve some of the most affluent districts that are there. And in some of our schools, it's the complete opposite. So really being able to provide a program that allows students that equity across, regardless of your zip code, I think is a tremendous importance of what we are able to offer.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. When you what resonated with me as you were talking through some of those challenges is certainly the scheduling and the busing and the transportation that needs to occur, but making sure that every student has access to those programs. And so not letting those things be a barrier or a challenge to bringing these programs in, rather offering a little bit more flexibility. What can we do to make sure that everyone has access to these programs in a way that creates the flexibility needed and wrap the schooling around the student to really make sure that everything that they learn is contextualized to their environment, what they love, and their passion. I really think that's an important piece, definitely, as we think through being able to surface some of the challenges as well as some outcomes from successes that we've had. Heidi, do you have any successful programs that you've been a part of that has offered either flexibility or new innovative ways and to ensure that some of the ideas that you might be able to surface for our participants here that might be able to take a few nuggets away from some of the successes that you've been able to stand up throughout your career?
Yes, absolutely. So in Texas, we have a school model called PTEC, and Ross mentioned it kind of at the beginning. And everything that you and Dr. Baker have just said, probably in the past 5 minutes, really kind of come together in what we call the PTEC blueprint. And everyone on the call can search online, and you can see the PTEC blueprint. So even if you don't have an official PTEC program, this blueprint is kind of a guide to what does a all-encompassing work-based learning plus the academic piece program look like for students. And so it talks about the types of students and the percentages of students that you want applying for the program. It talks about the wraparound services that you mentioned, Cassie. It talks about ways for students to leave high school with a high school diploma, 60 hours of college, a work-based credential, and an apprenticeship or an internship. And so if you think about that, that's a lot for a high school student, right? But when they do graduate, they're able to go straight to work. And so the other day I met a young lady. She was in a medical office, and I asked her, tell me how you got here. She was a phlebotomist. And she told me she had gone to a PTEC in Austin. And I said, tell me what you did. And she said, well, my freshman year, my health science teacher and I sat down and she created a plan for me. And this is her plan, and it's going to blow your mind. In high school, she got her phlebotomist and her CNA certifications. She finished her pathway. She graduated and was now working as a phlebotomist, going to an associate's RN program at the local community college, paying for her tuition from her salary that she was earning as a phlebotomist. After she finished her associate's RN, this is her plan. She told me, I'm going to work for 3 years in an emergency room, 3 days a week as an RN, and I'm going to seek my bachelor's RN. So then I can double my hourly wage. So within 5 years, I'm going to be a bachelor's RN and have no student debt. And so that to me is an example of a successful program, right? I'm
Absolutely.
like, oh, your PTEC program was a success. It did everything that we want it to do. And so I think there are about 68 PTECs in Texas right now. There's like 20 more in the planning stage. But this is kind of what you want to hear from students that are going through these pathways that we're talking about in these programs of study. I really liked that she built stackable credentials while she was in high school. She got that high wage job and is now able to continue her education. And so when we talk about funding, the P-TECH program in Texas, you do earn additional per student funding. But in front of the legislation right now, we're in open session right now. There is a proposal to triple that so that the funding will go to $150 per student. And then there's also some funding being placed on rural collaboratives. So y'all talked about, maybe some rural schools getting together, sharing CTE resources, sharing a CTE center. So there's funding around that as well. So pretty exciting. Dallas ISD is a leader in P-TECH in Texas. So if y'all are super interested to see, they've got everything posted on their website. You can enter Dallas P-TECH. You can take a look. They graduate hundreds of students each year with significant college hours and significant work credentials. So then primed to start their career, primed to continue their education. So
that sounds very familiar to an opportunity I had to visit one of the Louisville, Kentucky academies that we had just last year, particularly. They had a similar program. That's what's going on in Texas. So that is just super awesome. So let's see. I'm thinking we have flexibility, we have transportation, we have funding that needs to be happening. We have all of these things that need to be a part of a successful program. We need to identify those opportunities that might be there. What if I'm new? What if I don't know where to go? It's just something that's brand new. We've never started it before. I'm just going to open the floor to anyone for this response, but tell me a little bit more about where do I go to find the support? If I'm just starting and I want to find out more information, what might be the first place I would turn to? Who should be involved in some of these conversations to start leaning in a little bit towards these efforts if this is something that is new to me, new to my district particularly? Any advice you would have?
So one of the things that's really important is partnerships, right? Partnerships with a workforce partner and with a higher ed partner. And so I was working with a rural school in North Texas, and they kept telling me we don't have any employer partners here. And so I said, well, who do you have there? Well, they had a local grocery store. And so they wanted to establish a cybersecurity pathway. They didn't really know how to do this. And so we had a conversation, and I was like, every company is basically a technology company now. So reach out to your grocery store and have this conversation with them. So they did. Their counselor reached out. They sat down. They had a meeting with the manager of the store, and it turns out that cybersecurity is pretty important to a grocery store, right? They're dealing with inventory. They're dealing with people's payments. They're dealing with cash. They're dealing with employee records. And so they were able to just start from that conversation, setting up a partnership with understanding how their students in their cybersecurity pathway could actually partner with the grocery store to kind of talk through that. So it's kind of getting creative in your partnerships. And so sometimes it just starts with the conversation, right? Call your local community college or a local partner and say, hey, this is what we want to do. What do you see as a possible partnership? And that partnership can sometimes spur the entire program. So
absolutely. And then you could really contextualize that to the local needs and how that can build the economic welfare of their particular the localization, your communities, the partnerships you have within your communities. Definitely like to see the growth happen, the culture kind of create, all centered around being able to thrive in an environment like this. Anybody else have any suggestions that you would like to offer?
Well, I think the other thing that we talk about is in our partnerships with other districts, I go statewide. So if somebody's just getting started, chances are that one of my other 34 partners has gone through the exact same thing at some point in time. So whether I'm relaying that information or I can put somebody in contact with somebody that's already done some of this legwork, I think that's some of the other value of the partnerships that we hold.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I think that's all we have for today. Thank you all for your brave answers and the peppering of questions that I was able to offer today. Hopefully, our participants have got some good nuggets and key takeaways that they can take back and consider how they might be able to implement a successful career connected learning platform and program within their districts. I think, Ross, we have an opportunity now to turn it over for some Q&A. You're muted.
There we go. Okay, so here is some additional resources, folks. If you want to access any of these right away, we put some friendly links here, but we also will send these out via email after the webinar, so don't worry, you'll get all of these here. And yes, we do have a little time now for a little Q&A. We have a couple of questions to check on here and a couple of things we can get started. If you have any others for our panelists, we'll try to get to as many as we can here, and we have a little bit of time. So one to start out with, I think this refers to a couple of things that I think all of our panelists brought up to some extent. It relates to something David mentioned about the funding opportunities and combinations that are available when it's CTE for all. And Heidi and Joe both mentioned the different partnerships and districts. I think there's a question that dives into that a little further, which is for those of us, who are working in districts who are traditionally working with CTE programs, CTE directors in districts or school level, or those who are hands-on with these programs and who want to get other administrators in their districts more involved with the planning and visioning for their career connected learning, right? They might be able to work together and collaborate on pursuing funding to do more things. How can those folks start some of those conversations and enter into those partnerships by communicating some of what they've learned here today, right? If they have, whether it could be principals, it could be superintendents or curriculum directors, other administrators, but yeah, how can folks kind of get more of those leaders engaged in discussions about CTE program planning if they haven't traditionally been? And I'm sure anybody here may have thoughts on that.
So I think as a former administrator, I was always driven by, start with the student first, right? So I know the workforce learning piece and the workforce training piece is a little mysterious in high school because we haven't really had those strong connections with the workforce yet, but they're being developed. And so I think maybe finding the connection first and then bringing it to the administrator would be helpful. I also think with the new emphasis on accountability, because earning IBCs in an aligned program of study is aligned and tied to Texas accountability as well. I think looking at, and what we've done quite a few times is we've actually calculated what our accountability would look like if we met these standards. And so showing the outcomes that you could achieve if you had more collaboration across the district and maybe across the community would be helpful as well. So.
Excellent.
I think the other thing that we have is our partnership managers really bring a lot to the table whenever we start talking about, trying to find alternative funding sources. We talked earlier about Perkins funds to be able to offset some of the costs of what we have here. But I know that in their dealings with a lot of different districts, really trying to be creative with funding structures, really they bring a lot to the table whenever it comes to trying to fund a lot of these programs in ways that a lot of administrators may not traditionally think of.
Great. So another question here, I think, is this one seems to be primarily geared toward David. And it is, so I know typically more of looking at the data versus the crystal ball, but I think this is maybe a little more of a crystal ball, which is, you know, predictions for the outlook over the next several years. There's been a lot of trends. Um, I think 40 states last year passed 152 policies right around CTE. Is 47 states passed a lot of policies. So there's a lot here. Happening in pretty much every state across the country and federally. So it would seem to be a pretty reliable case here where districts can look at what's happening in their states and then commit to investing in and building programs, and that this will continue to be a long-term priority. But what's your analysis of that, or from what you're seeing, does this, seem like the type of thing that will continue to drive forward? Is there any information that we don't know yet that people should still be looking for?
Well, I'll gonna, as in some ways, my response to that echo what Heidi and Dr. Baker is saying, in that, like, the laws and the regulations and the funding, they don't carve their own paths. Like this, there is momentum for this already happening. So maybe it's an apprenticeship program. Maybe it's this business relationship with municipalities and local employers who are trying to solve problems. Odds are, the momentum we've seen and what we will continue to see is investing into programs that have been brought to the attention of lawmakers and seem to be working. And so that's dual enrollment, that's apprenticeship programs, that's providing incentives to get more kids to enroll, that's supporting the courses. So I think if you're thinking about the opportunities locally, take a step back, look around, see what's working, see what you can begin to spike the football on, and then build that into what's likely to continue to move. So, this programs and school funding, it's not like we start over anew year over year. There's momentum already there. It's just knowing how can you slightly redirect the momentum in a way that really benefits the expansion of CTE. So I think if you're looking into what's likely to happen, kind of look in the rearview mirror. Well, where have you been? What's already happening? And how can you build momentum and also help people connect the dots to recognize that if you were to do something different, if you were to bring these other parties to the table and build on the success that's already there, that's probably the most effective way to get it done.
Excellent. I think we have time for one more here. And so our last question is going to be one that I want to ask. And I'm going to start by asking this to Cassie, since she has been asking the questions today. And then our other panelists are free to chime in, but it's something that's kind of near to my heart and interest, which is about, what schools, school leaders, district leaders, how they can go about communicating their vision for career connected learning to their communities, parents, other stakeholders in the communities, right? To get that important community buy-in, helping parents to work with their children to make decisions about which courses of learning they want to participate in, helping to cultivate other partnerships and understand what this vision is of the modern, the modern type of programs that we've been talking about here, right? That those of us in education maybe have discussed a lot, but not everybody has been as immersed in it. So how can schools be proactive about that? What are some of the things they should be making sure to talk about and communicate about so that all those other important stakeholders really understand it?
Mm-hmm. Well, definitely, I believe that parents are your greatest advocate for their students. They understand their child the best. They understand where their passions lie, and they need to be in a strong partnership with that particular school. And that comes through in a lot of different ways. First, you can communicate via email. You could do some vlogging if you want to video, but most importantly, you need to invite your parents inside your classrooms. Invite them to be a participant, either volunteering or whatnot. I most recently engaged in the state of Iowa. We have a mandatory what's called ICAP days, where students in middle school all the way through their senior year, they need to be involved in some sort of individual career and academic planning notion. And I got an opportunity to interview 7 seniors as a volunteer to understand what's happening inside those classrooms for the vision of where they're heading. So I interviewed them as if it was a mock interview, and just getting involved in being a parent volunteer inside the classroom is where you're going to really see the vision come to life, and then encourage those parents to participate in that, because then you can see exactly where the school is headed, as well as being an advocate for maybe perhaps the things that you would like to improve upon. And so on at the administrator level, then there's always an opportunity for forums, whether it be at your local school board or the different avenues to invite the media to be able to participate and share the vision from that perspective as well. What are other thoughts?
Anybody else like to share? Awesome. Well, thank you. First, to our participants, thank you all for joining us today, for being part of our webinar. Again, you see this list of resources on the screen. You will receive them via email so that you can watch our previous webinar recordings. We have an article as well that summarizes a lot of the takeaways from those. If you prefer to read it, we have more information on the partnership with Interplay Learning that was announced last week to bring skilled trades prep to high schools, and a variety of other resources for career-connected learning. So you'll receive those along with the recording from today. We really do appreciate you all being here, and I certainly want to thank our panel, Cassie, David, Heidi, and Joe. Really great to have you all here sharing your expertise. And so we thank you all. We thank everybody for being here. And until next time, have a great afternoon.